What a gorgeous day out there. Good day. Beautiful day. And all the better to be here. We will this morning continue to consider the wisdom of Solomon. Hopefully we'll pick up a little as we go. Let's see, we're supposed to pick up the understanding and then practice the wisdom. Okay. Yeah. We have been considering the Proverbs topically, taking them really word by word as a subject matter. And today the subject is the words themselves. Let me begin with this question. What is an abomination? Whether it's how one person might look at another's lifestyle or how God may look at man. When you say someone's ways are an abomination, what does that mean? Pardon? Your mother had more than 7 things she hated. So, an abomination simply means it's detestable. It's disgusting. And so when it says that God finds these things to be abominable, it's somebody's ways are disgusting. The behavior is detestable. Solomon said there are 7 things that God hates. He said there are 7 disgusting, detestable things. These are the conditions of the wicked man's heart. Let's begin at Proverbs chapter 6 and verse 16. Proverbs 6 and beginning in verse 16. There are 6 things which the Lord hates. Why it's worded this way, I'm not sure. I think the 6 perhaps is speaking of evil itself, but yes, 7 which are an abomination to him. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that run rapidly to evil, a false witness who utters lies, and one who spreads strife among brothers. 7 things the Lord hates. Did you notice how many of them have to do with the words we speak? 3 of the 7. A lying tongue, a false witness who utters lies, and one who spreads such talk among brothers. 3 of the 7 have to do with the misuse of words. I want to ask this question. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. I kind of thought through the congregation. I think I know about how many, but how many have been victimized by others' lying words or their false witness where they just kind of shaded something they said about you, or those who were spreading strife? At some time, most everybody here. On the other hand, and don't answer this one, how many of us have victimized others the same way? With a lying tongue and a false witness, and spreading strife. In other words, not sowing peace. Talking about what ought not to be talked about. Even if there was a legitimate problem, when we talk about these things when we shouldn't, it's somehow just shading or twisting the words, twisting the evidence. We're making matters worse by, well, even if it's not outright gossip. I find very few people who admit to gossip, but that innuendo, that insinuation, that roll of the eye, the whole thing. Simply put, God hates any communication that cannot be taken at face value and trusted, and any communication which is not a means of blessing others. that's, as Solomon broadly talks about life and death, the terms of blessedness or the lack of it. He hates anything which does not bless others. And so Solomon says quite a lot about words because words have power. Understanding even by honest, good conversation is hard enough. But it's far harder with dishonest words, or when the witness is just intentionally shading something or intentionally spreading strife, just by it being something that ought not be spread. There's no blessing in it. Can we just admit this isn't a rare problem? Is it? It's not. Whether you're the one victimized or you're the one who's victimized others, it's not a rare problem. And all of us, don't be offended by me saying that, but all of us, I suspect, have at some time spread things that we had no business spreading. And the point is that words are powerful. Words are powerful. Again, Solomon makes this point that death and life are in the power of the tongue. Look at Proverbs 18 and verse 21. Proverbs 18 and verse 21. Just exactly how it says, death and life. He could just as well say blessings or cursings, light or dark, but death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit.
Did you say 18:21? Yes.
Yeah, 18 verse 21. Now, whether he's speaking literally or figuratively, this is true. Life in Solomon's lingo is a metaphor for refreshment, being daily refreshed by good words. But it can be a matter literally of life or death, can it? Remember the case, was it last year? The young man that committed suicide because his girlfriend was continually berating him over emails and stuff and pushing him that direction. Now, you can fault whoever you want in that, but it can be a matter of life and death. That someone would be so distraught by words that they would do something like that. Spiritually speaking, again, you don't have to name anybody, but give some thought. How many people might you name who have left the church because of something that was said that shouldn't have been said? And, sometimes we can rationalize that. We can say, well, it's the hearer's problem. You notice what Solomon does? He puts the onus on the speaker. It may or may not be the hearer's problem, but it can't be a problem if the person didn't say it to begin with. And so it's imperative that we use the tongue properly. Words are powerful. They're powerful in the sense that they penetrate feelings. Look at chapter 12, verse 18. Chapter 12, verse 18. There is one who speaks rashly like the thrusts of a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Verse 25. Anxiety in a man's heart weighs it down, but a good word makes it glad. We're talking about motive and intent. The word thrust, that's intended to, in a sense, eviscerate somebody. So one, in verse 18, one is intending to harm, the other one is intending to help, to heal. Anxiety, in the verse 20, in a man's heart weighs it down, but a good word makes it glad. Again, you could say, well, that's all the problem of the hearer. No, it's not. For the most part, Solomon says if it's not said to begin with, then it's not going to be a problem. We have to weigh what we say and how we say it. Uh-huh. Yeah.
An evil man is ensnared by the transgressions of his lips, but the righteous will escape from trouble.
Which verse you in, dear?
That's in 12:13.
Okay.
So if the person that's speaking will get more time being ensnared by what he's doing. But if you read from the righteous, you haven't done that. You don't have to worry.
That's the problem. That's, the line, you gotta remember what you're saying.
Hard to keep track of all that.
Mess yourself up, you know?
Then they're just speaking like them, so the righteous can escape from it because they don't have to worry about covering up everything.
The false witness is often doing so because he wants to manipulate somebody. So I have to remember what I said, how I said it to Dan to manipulate him. I'd have to say it to you differently. And then I go, now which one did I say that to? You know, it's the simple point is just honest, forthright, face value communication, spoken kindly. Yes, sir.
Also, one of the big problems in dealing with this kind of stuff, it's usually a problem on both sides. One, it was definitely wrong for somebody to say something,
Yeah.
but then usually the person who is the result of it handles it incorrectly. Nobody's putting God first in the way they're dealing with it.
Yeah.
In either way, you see that often. And a lot of times, the person who hears something may have even taken it out of context,
Yeah.
missed it, but then uses that as excuse to walk away.
Mm-hmm.
And
The old
it is a major problem on both ends.
The Euodia and Syntyche problem in
James
Philippians.
says,
Yeah.
with your mouth you bless, and
Yeah.
with your mouth you curse.
You know, I asked that question a while ago. How many people might you name who have left the church because of something said? The ones I know who have left the church, it wasn't a big thing. It was some little
Excuse. That's another I've seen a lot.
perceived slight, something that, yes, it was foolish, but it
Should
was.
never been said, but there's better ways to deal with it if you're truly right with
Yeah.
God and want to be right with God.
And that's ultimately the purpose of all this. Both to prosper yourself and the other person, and both to be made right with God. And so it's really the fruit of wisdom. We talked earlier about gaining understanding, and you leave this place and it's time to go practice. It's the fruit of wisdom. Proverbs 16, verse 24. Pleasant words are a honeycomb. I like the way that puts. You get the picture of it interwoven together. A whole honeycomb of blessing. Sweet to the soul, healing to the bones. The fruit of wisdom, the practice of wisdom is saying pleasant words when we can. I think we can imply when you can't, it's best not to say anything at all. But words, they're powerful. They penetrate feelings. They also penetrate attitudes. And in the sense of manipulating attitudes somewhat. Proverbs 18, verse 8. I find this one fascinating, the way it's worded, particularly if you go back and look up the meanings of these original words. Proverbs 18, verse 8, the words of a whisperer are like dainty morsels, and they go down into the innermost parts of the body. The original word for dainty morsels is they're in really bite-sized pieces. And the word is for bait. If somebody's, well, first, who's the whisperer here?
In verse 7, it says, the fool's lips, the fool's mouth is his ruin, and his lips are the snare of his soul.
Yeah.
And then it goes right into the snare
The whisper's this one. And the implication is, Jeff, you're the only one I'm telling. Isn't it? It's always that. Isn't that the implication of it? You're the only one who knows. And this does get to the hearer. Why is gossip so effective? Because there's always somebody ready to hear it. There's always somebody willing to swallow the bait. It's a huge problem. But it's made tasty in these little dainty morsels. And the bearer of the strife, it makes it so appealing that way.
If we have to start with don't tell anyone.
Yeah.
That's you might as well say it.
There ought to already be the mindset that if it's between me and you, I'm not going to say it, but yeah, that does involve both sides. But if, yeah, oh,
In a
I really,
situation where it's
yeah,
it's different.
really ought not say this, but
Talking about
yeah, Jeff.
I've always noticed that gossip never has any positives to it. No one ever gossips like, "Boy, you just wouldn't believe how great that person was today." It's always in the negative.
It's
never a plus of praise or anything like that. It's always, "Well, you wouldn't believe what they did," or "What they."
at the very least, it's a manipulation. I'm here, I know this, you know. But most often, yeah, it is tearing down someone. But you know, the Southern thing is, for Southern women, while sticking a knife in your back, they say, "Bless your heart." You know, yeah, they do. Rather than, you know, they're too nice to say, "You look awful in that dress." Oh, bless her heart. They know what they mean to one another. But, you know, it's not building up anybody. And in that way, words do affect self-esteem. Look at Proverbs 29 and verse 5. Proverbs 29 verse 5, a man who flatters his neighbor is spreading a net for his steps. Jill, you already read one verse about being entrapped, and Dina read one too. But this one who flatters his neighbor, this one's trying to trap his neighbors. You know, it's not that he's really trying to build you up. It's not that he's really trying to please you. He's trying to deceive you, so he can later get what he wants from you, or at very least, maybe later when need be, you'll cover for his lies. You know, yes, Joe?
Well, like you said, gossip's a secret, so that person would be really nice to that person, but then when you're around the back, you're talking about stuff down. You know, I've seen that happen a lot. You know, be really nice to them, but then really you're not being nice. You're putting on the front,
And as it says there, he spreaded the net for his neighbor's steps. Well, you know, then if you praise me enough, then I owe you something. You know, then surely you would never criticize me, or you know, it does speak a lot to motive and gets right down to the heart of the person. It does get into this matter of self-esteem as well. I shared with you recently, I was doing a little study about self-esteem and the problem of it. And I looked online, there are more than 400 words that are hyphenated now: self-esteem, self-acceptance, self-gratification, It goes on and on. What's the problem with that? Self. And so, in this case, the one who is filling you with a lot of hot air, it speaks to the motive of that one who's doing so. I mean, if somebody ought to be sincerely acknowledged for their work, then do so. But if not, it's really manipulation. Number 4, words penetrate beliefs and convictions. They're powerful to do so. Again, would have something to do with the strength of the convictions of the hearer, but what's the intention of it? Proverbs 10, verse 21. Here, this is all about motive and intention. What do you want to do? Proverbs 10, verse 21. The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for lack of understanding. What do you want? Are you wanting to bless others? Do you want to feed many, in a sense, feed them with blessings? Or what happens to those who die for lack of understanding? Anything else kills. If it's not feeding what is good, anything else kills. I was looking into the word in the next Proverbs, Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 9. Here's the contrast. With his mouth, the godly man destroys his neighbor, but through knowledge, the righteous will be delivered. With his mouth, the godless man destroys his neighbor. Is that what you have? I just read it. Destroys his neighbor. I looked up that original word. It's a word for kill. And this is a word like an assassin. Pretty graphic word. Destroys his neighbor. This is talking about verbal assassination. If you do not control what you say, you're a godless man who... We never do it perfectly, but if the habit of your life is not to control what you're saying, you're a godless person. In other words, you just don't revere God and that responsibility that we have to bless others. The one who watches his words is then preserving his neighbor's life rather than destroying it. Mm-hmm. The
I don't care. Yeah, you got a gun.
well, problem sometimes too, it's got a hair trigger on it. Yes, Joe.
I like the true knowledge. So for me, in the situation that I had experienced, that the knowledge that I had about how to, the right way to do it, it even works if you have to do it people in the world. And if you have the right knowledge of how to handle that situation, and I did have the right knowledge, and I went to the person in humbleness, not in anger, not in anything else, to try to understand
Yeah.
the situation. And I tell you what, it did in the bud.
Well, the righteous person is always seeking themselves to understand, to help others understand, to make sure both will ultimately be blessed. At least that's what they're striving for. You can't determine always how the other person will receive it, but you've done what you can.
I think we have a big responsibility, like Dan was saying, as Christians, no matter what hurts us or no matter what it is, we have that responsibility to react in a godly way. And even if the person doesn't receive it like that, that's it. You're delivered. It's off your shoulders.
Yeah. Yeah, again, first, he's putting the onus on the speaker. You can't always control the other side, but you're working to establish understanding. What'd you have, Dan?
Just my grandmother used to said somebody was gonna tell her something not positive, she would stop. She goes, just one thing, is this gonna bless the person you're talking about? And that would stop it. She would say that to us kids if we were tattling. She goes, are you telling me to bless the person, or are you telling me for evil reasons? She would always ask us that. She'd tell the people at church, is this gonna bless the person you're talking about? And then people quit that. They quit going to her with stuff because they didn't want to hear that, because it was a reality check.
I do remember a particular group of elders that were strong about that. If somebody came in, did you hear about? Whoop, I don't want to hear about it until you went and talked to them. Don't tell me.
That's the solution. That's the solution.
Just stop it right there.
Do it in not in a way for anger, but do it in a way that they're trying to understand.
With the gossip, aren't you really trying to build a case for your view? Here, you agree with me, and then we kind of all have this view. And
Gang up on the ones that don't have.
You get on
yeah,
your team to get them to
but I was always. I was often impressed with that eldership, how quickly they would say that. You could see somebody coming. Have you talked to them first? And certainly it's wise counsel. Certainly it is.
I want to say it's none of your doggone business. And that's it.
It's in spreading words that have been said, it's often about the intent, what you're spreading. In a bad sense, look at Proverbs 10, beginning in verse 10. This is interesting how it works, how the motives are revealed. Proverbs 10, verse 10, he who winks the eye causes trouble, and a babbling fool will be ruined. The mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all transgressions. On the lips of the discerning wisdom is found, but a rod is for the back of him who lacks understanding. Wise men store up knowledge, but with the mouth of the foolish, ruin is at hand. It's all, again, about motive and result. Verse 10, winks at evil. Sometimes the body language says enough, is, this thing. And there's so many ways that we really signal our intent. Verse 11, no matter what he says, one who has proven himself wicked, one who is known for concealing violence, no matter what he says, you better not take his words at face value. That's really what he's talking about. Can you really trust what is said? In verse 12, nothing is good coming from those who are spreading these hateful words. Hatred stirs up strife. That's like an absolute. It can't stir up anything else. Love covers all transgressions. That's what you were alluding to, Jill, when there's a misunderstanding. Love compelled you to go to that person. Let's see if we can understand this and settle that. Verse 14, the words spread by the fool result in ruin. It may sound good on the short term. Well, let's just go with this today. We don't know when the ruins come, but what do we know? Hatred, wickedness, all that can only result in ruin. That's the bad sense. On the other hand, in the good sense, right there in that same passage, verse 11, the mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life. So a fountain is an ever-present source of blessing. That's the good use of words. In Proverbs 12, in verse 14, a man will be satisfied with good by the fruit of his words, and the deeds of a man's hands will return to him. Again, talk about results. The man will be satisfied with good by the fruit of his words. Of course, that does depend upon how those words are received, but the intent of his heart, even if it's not received well, that man who spoke honestly as he should, with sincere motives, would certainly be assured of just the confidence that he had done so, that he was seeking to build up and to bless others. Hebrews 4 and verse 2 is an illustration of that. Hebrews 4 and verse 2, "For indeed we have had good news preached to us, just as they also. But the word they heard did not profit them, because it was not united by faith in those who heard." Still, you've got those who taught them the good word. They were blessed. They were strengthened by it. Now, you can't always control how it's received, or you can't really ever control how it's received. But there is the good sense that you've done what you should. The contrast of the good and the evil, the bad use of the tongue, or the bad use of Twitter as well, seems like that's worse than the tongue directly, isn't it? Things that people say on electronic media that they wouldn't say in person. But Proverbs 15 and verse 4, "A soothing tongue is a tree of life, but perversion in it crushes the spirit." One is a tree of life, that's a balm, that's a comfort, like a salve to the spirit. On the other hand, the perversion, the twisting of words, the twisting of the manipulation of the person, it crushes the spirit. And so much for the old saying about sticks and stones can break your bones. What's the rest of that? Not so, is it? Not so. I mean, that's one of those things that might be nice when you're the one hurt and you say it as some sort of defense, but we all know that's not true. It's the power of words. It crushes the spirit, it cuts, it eviscerates. There is good power, there is bad power, but on the other hand, there's a weakness in words as well. Because you can do a whole lot of talking and a lot of doing, can't you? And that happens quite a bit. Proverbs 14 and verse 21. "He who despises his neighbor sins, but happy is he who is gracious to the poor." One of them looks at his neighbor and does nothing for them. The other one is doing something. By gracious, he's giving himself to do something for the neighbor. And simply put, work always produces more than talk. The wise man prospers by giving himself to labor, while the fool despises the thought of labor. We've seen that. And the fool's going to talk so long he'll wind up in the poorhouse. You know, one talks about work and the other one actually gets to work. We see that in Matthew 21 and verse 28. Remember the story, Matthew 21, verse 28 and following? The father had two sons, and the first one is told to go work in the vineyard, and the first, he says, "No, I won't go." And then he changes his mind and he goes to work. The second son says, "Yes, I will go," but he doesn't. Which one receives the reward? Which one's righteous? Yeah, the first one was wrong, but he repented. The other one was wrong and stayed wrong, didn't he? You know, there's a weakness in words in that way that people can say, oh yeah, I'll do this, I'll do this. I read an article one day, it was really good. It's talking about it. People ask for prayer. Oh yeah, I'll pray for you. You know, and sometimes we think, oh, yeah, you'll cross my mind during the day, and I'll think, oh, well, I hope that turns out right. But do you ever, really get deep down into it and pray for them? The weakness of words as well is they cannot alter the fact. They really cannot change the way a man really is. The one who is wicked. You know, they can say what they want, but they really can't change unless that person has intended to change. Look at Proverbs chapter 26, beginning in verse 23. Proverbs 26, verse 23. Like an earthen vessel overlaid with silver dross are burning lips and a wicked heart. You take a plain old clay pot and you cover it with silver, but what kind of silver is it? It's slag. It's oh yeah, it's kind of shiny, but it's not going to stay shiny for long. In furniture business, we used to call that gilding the lily. You take a piece of junk and put a fancy finish on it, but that's about it. It's the modern equivalent of this would be lip gloss. Our twin granddaughters are big on lip gloss. It's like glazing over the malicious intent. Well, the lips sure are pretty when they say it, but you know, it's a mess. Yeah, Jeff?
It's kind of like what Jesus told the Pharisees when they were whitewashed tombs. It looks good on the outside.
Yep. Just window dressing.
It all wears out.
Verse 24 and 25. He who hates disguises it with his lips, but he lays up deceit in his heart. When he speaks graciously, do not believe him. Again, if somebody's known for not controlling what they say, and too often known for not being a blessing to others and the way that they speak of them or speak to them, well, on a day when they occasionally might speak graciously, can you take that at face value? You ought to be willing to, but you have to be willing to see through it as well. In verse 26, though his hatred covers it with guile, his wickedness will be revealed before the assembly. A group of people who have understanding will be able to see through that. That's one of the reasons Solomon talks so often about our association. Wise people associate with wise people. They have a common understanding. They can see through that guile. But a fool never will. They're not even trying to. And so they'll see through the pretense. And the result in verse 27, he who digs a pit will fall into it. And he who rolls a stone, it'll come back on him. I guess he who throws a boomerang, it'll come back and hit you in the head too. It's really the picture. How quick's it going to happen? We may never see it. May never see it. But it is going to come back. the result. Did you have something, Dan?
Yeah, you know, as we're reading this, a lot of this is self-esteem or lack of self-esteem. Because that's why you say words to put people down, to build yourself up in a lot of cases. You know, you look at, we used to have a training program at church, and we would get complaints sometimes because, well, that young man didn't lead singing well.
Mm-hmm.
But if their child or grandchild went up there, it didn't matter how it came out, it was wonderful. And that's how Christians are sometimes. We're not really putting God first. We're just interested in our own self-worth and how we look. And
Yeah.
how, you know, and it's all that self-esteem issue.
Just in putting yourself in that position, well, my grandson was wonderful, but that guy's awful. Wait,
Wrong heart.
wrong heart. Just wrong heart.
And that's the root of all this that you're talking about here.
And verse 28 is really a summary statement of that. Is the summary statement of the motives and of the result. A lying tongue hates those it crushes. You cannot say that you love somebody, that you're concerned for somebody's welfare if you're twisting words. And a flattering mouth works ruin. I hate to end on a down thing there, but flip it around. The honest mouth is blessing. Yes, Jim?
Well, I think for me, and maybe this, when I was getting things as a Christian, and I was talking about, you know, the spoken word, I thought about God spoke the world into existence. And so I thought to myself, that's really powerful. And so I got to thinking about how powerful the Bible is. You know, and that I'm going to be judged for what I spoke, because that's how powerful. Just like when you think about God's word, which is also the mind, is also
Sometimes the manipulation too is you know, there's things I wouldn't dare to say to a strong person, but if you know somebody's weaker, then, you know, go for it. Sort of like a dog establishing the pecking order, you know.
Words can put us in jail.
The force of it is that words are powerful. Words are powerful. And we'll continue to consider this. They ought always to be used honestly and for the upbuilding and encouragement. And even when they need to be a correction or a rebuke, they've got to be well considered, carefully considered. We'll consider that more next week.